Glad you were all able to make it out here on a Saturday. Appreciate that very much. I think almost all of you know me, but in case you don't, I'm Dan Tace, and I am an elder here at Northpointe.
Woohoo! Hi, Dan.
Thank you, Rick. So, want to just recap how we got here. So, about 5 years ago, Rick and the elders started talking about the fact that Rick may not be our senior pastor until Jesus comes back.
But maybe.
But maybe, yeah. So they started talking about, so what does a transition plan look like? So the elders got together, they started reading books, they started looking at things, started praying. And then in 2023, Rick said, okay, here's my date. I would like to retire by June 1st, 2025. So that began a process with us of praying about who's God calling for the next lead pastor. We had Jake. Jake was interested. We were interested. So we went through 4 different interviews with Jake. One of them, the first one, was on doctrine to see if he was a heretic or not. We found out he's not.
Close.
This close. That whole Ohio State thing's got to go, buddy.
That saved him.
Well, I think it was Vic that asked, do we not get lead pastors from anywhere other than Ohio? Seems that way.
It's a great church. It's a great church.
But Jake is married to a Spartan, so that helps. So we went through 4 different interviews with Jake, bringing in different leaders to get a clue of where Jake's at, how Jake's going to fit. The pastors or the elders spent 2 days in fasting and prayer, and we came to the conclusion that Jake is the guy that we wanted to move forward with. So we wanted to have everybody from the congregation have an opportunity to talk with Jake, to ask some questions, to get to know him. Unfortunately, we all know Jake very well. So we don't have a lot of questions, but this is your chance to ask Jake, ask the elders. I think we're all here. Yep, we're all here. So if you have any questions, we're hanging around here. We're happy to answer them. So with that, I'll turn it over to you and Jake.
All right. Sounds good. You know what? Before we do, Ashley, why don't you stand up over there? And you got Annalise. Don't have all the littles. But if you've never met Ashley, yeah, if you're on the podcast, Ashley's over there. So, yeah. Ashley and Annalise. Jake, come on up. It's funny, we weren't sure kind of where to do this meeting, what kind of format, and we realized that people may want to be here but can't be here this morning. So we decided to make it a podcast, so we've got the camera going, got the mics going. Are we doing okay sound-wise? Sylvia is back playing technical guru. Hi, Jake.
Feels weird, right? Like there's done 1,000 podcasts together and everything else.
Yeah, I think we're on about podcast 140, but never with a studio audience.
No, live. Northpointe Plus live before a studio audience.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's just talk a little bit about background stuff. We've got a bunch of questions. We're just going to talk for a while, and then there'll be opportunity when we finish. If you've got questions and want to go one-on-one with any of us, that'd be great too. When we talk about lead pastor, this is so weird. A lot of the time we talk about calling. What's your calling? So in 2016, when you came on staff, and again, just some background kind of things. When I came in 2014. That fall I was preaching and this kid came up after one of the messages and said, "You're from Ohio? Cincinnati? Skyline Chili? Bengals? Ohio State?"
Yeah.
And we had this conversation, and it was a fun interaction because Ashley's parents are part of Northpointe. Jake and Ashley.
So this is all Tom and Pat's fault. Is what we're getting to at this point in time.
That's it. And so that was when we first met. There's a really cool God story in that we moved Chris from student pastor to life groups to a groups pastor. were ready to hire somebody internally. Jake had put his name in to say, hey, I would love to come to Northpointe.
I think I actually gave you my resume with a can of Skyline chili, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I think that's accurate. And I said, hey, I think we're going to hire internally. Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
Jake and Ashley bought a house in Cincinnati. Our internal candidate didn't work out. And so I called Jake back and said, are you still interested?
Yeah.
And he said, we just bought a house. Actually, I think when we talked on the phone, you were painting the last room.
Yeah.
You were just finishing the last step.
Like 6 weeks of work, and we were like finally there with where we wanted the house to be. And Rick calls. It was like, man.
And so you tell that story from there.
Yeah. So we literally got everything done within our house and painted the last room, all this stuff, fixer upper. And, you know, a lot of times you buy a house, your first mortgage payment is kind of included in that. So we hadn't like paid or sent in our first check when Rick calls at this point in time. And so Ashley and I are talking, and we're like, man, we really thought God had closed all the doors there, but all right, we'll be obedient and just check and see what happens here. And we come up, we fall in love with the place and everything. Lots of crazy stories from that whole interview session and stuff. But then we have to sell our house if we're going to come up. So we go down, we talk to our realtor, and she tells us to put it on the market for $20,000 more than we bought it. And we said, we've lived here like 2 months. Like, people can Google. Like, this is not a thing. She said, just try it out. So we tried it out on, what was it, a Tuesday? We listed it, and we were driving up here to Lansing to have Thanksgiving at my in-laws on Wednesday. And on the drive up, we got a phone call, and somebody had it. We had an accepted offer for $20,000 over what we had bought the house. And we were completely out of it. So it was great because that helped cover like a lot of the expenses and costs from such a quick turnover and things like that. So, yeah.
And from my perspective, someone who has moved multiple times and not had houses sell, that was a really, really nice blessing from God.
Nice. Yeah.
So let's go back. When we hired you and you said, and you're coming as student pastor, you said, ultimately, I want to be lead pastor. I can remember doing the Zoom interview and you saying that and thinking, okay, do we want a student pastor who really wants to be a lead pastor? Is that going to work out okay? But talk about your calling.
Yeah, so growing up, grew up in a Christian home. My parents loved Jesus. My grandparents, it just kind of flowed through our family forever. And there was only 2 things that I ever really wanted to do. First was be Batman. And that didn't really happen. Go figure, right? That was crushing. But and then the second one was ministry. I always thought I was going to wind up doing missions work in China and things like that. But for me, ministry was the only thing I ever wanted to do. And the lead pastor position was something I think that just kind of drew in my heart because the ability to love, the ability to influence, the ability to reach so many people and create culture that is going to be gospel driven, all of those kinds of things. Growing up throughout school, that was always the thing. You know, I had great mentors. In high school, I can remember our youth pastor, our youth group was big enough that he couldn't necessarily connect with every single kid. And so Bill Woolley was our youth volunteer. We called him William Willis, and from Braveheart. Yeah, William Willis. Nice. And I loved Bill so much because we would be in his basement at his house talking about stuff. And as I'm talking with all the other guys in the room, Bill pulls me aside one day and he goes, man, you got to go in ministry. You've got to be a lead pastor. You absolutely have to do this. I was like, well, why do you say that? He goes, man, just your ability to like have conversations, your ability to love people, the things that you bring to our group. He said, just totally different, man. And I appreciate all that. And like this moment, like embedded in my head, because it was the first time somebody had come to me and said, hey man, I think God is calling you to do this kind of thing. And it was just, it was a youth volunteer. The guy didn't have some degree or some like whatever kind of thing. He was just a loving heart that loved young guys and wanted to be a part of it. And so that kind of leaned the trajectory of kind of what I wanted to be able to do. I got to do some missions work in China, hopped on a plane. I had breakfast with Dr. Leland Kennedy at Bob Evans for about 3 hours. And he said, hey, cool, 4 months from now, hop on a plane into Hong Kong. When you get there, I'll tell you what we're going to do. Okay, so we bought a ticket.
How old were you?
I was in college because I quit playing football so I could do this trip because I couldn't take that much time off and still be a part of the team and like all the other stuff that football requires of you. So I quit football to do this, and I was 19, I think, at the time. And so I didn't know anybody except for the 3-hour conversation with Dr. Kennedy. Got on the plane trip, went over there, and I mean, incredible story after incredible story of how God showed up. But first time I ever felt real persecution for the faith there. We actually had people break into our hotel room and go through all our luggage and stuff like that. They were spying on us. They had arrested people and stuff like that, kicked us out of camps and stuff. So Yeah, so missions work with China was always a big heart. And what I found out is God had told me for years that I was going to do missions work in China so he could get me in China to kind of get me away from everybody else. And him and I could just talk and hang out. Because when you don't know Mandarin, conversations are limited. So we had a lot of alone time, a lot of good conversations and friendships. So, yeah.
Wow.
Calling, there you go.
That it's funny because you don't talk about that China trip a lot, and yet it was really formative.
Yeah.
For you.
So there's a Christian music artist, John Foreman. He was with Switchfoot for a long time. He created an EP album about that time, and it goes through all the different seasons. And we played it one of his songs sometime here on something, and it was like a total flashback moment for me because I can remember, how memories work. I can remember being on the bus and the rain and smells and all the stuff that kind of went there, and then I had flashbacks to all these people. And this was like 4 months ago or something like that. And you get busy, but yeah, it was an incredible time because I followed a 75-year-old man who was jogging through the streets of Hong Kong to get place to place and just had this incredible passion for Jesus, and we were exhausted by the end of every single day, and he's still fired up, ready to go. And just watching his passion and his drive, and then his honesty when he would tell you something, he wasn't sugarcoating anything, man. He was old school, like right there in between it, and I loved it. He's passed away now, but fortunate to get to know his son and his grandson, stuff like that too, and have a little contact there. But
cool. One of the things I think for a lot of people, you're up front, you teach a lot.
Yeah.
People kind of know who you are. Ashley's kind of in the background.
Yeah.
Kind of like Deb.
Yeah.
And that we think that's a cool thing.
That's where they want to be most of the time.
That's right. There.
Yeah.
So how's Ashley feel about you being lead pastor?
Yeah. She's excited, I think, just like we're all kind of excited. I think there's unknowns of kind of like, okay, what is this going to actually look or be like or those kinds of things. And we've had those conversations. The reality is she's in the same place, and it's like, hey, if this is what God wants, we want to be obedient to whatever that may be. Throughout this entire process, and even in Cincinnati and moving up here, we'd applied to 10 different churches in the Midwest, 4 of them in Michigan. Had a lot of relational connections with people. I was in a 9-month process with the church. Had a handshake agreement when I left the door. Didn't hear for 2 weeks, and then the whole thing fell apart because they had an issue in their church. Like all of these things that we had just known that, hey, God's going to direct the paths if we're just trying to be obedient to that, if we're being prayerful, if we're being patient, if we're doing all of those kinds of things. And so that's kind of been the mentality, is just kind of figuring out, hey, is this what God wants? And I think we both strongly feel like, hey, he's been working in this whole thing that, Tom and Pat weren't coming to Northpointe when Ashley and I got married. They were going to a different church. We were down in Cincinnati. They got invited by friends. And then it just happened to be as we're coming up on a Sunday to go to church, I've got nothing in my mind, right? It was just happened to be. And then, like you said, this guy from Dayton, Ohio, who's talking about Buckeyes and watching everybody groan, and I'm the only one going, oh, hey, that's not too bad. What's wrong with these people, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, all of these things, just watching how God orchestrates and just trusting and being obedient that the Spirit is doing something in it. So that's kind of the mentality. We're trying to rest in that. There's hills and there's valleys in every process and in every time and all the things. And we know that. But I think for us, it's the idea of saying, hey, if we're being obedient to God, if we're seeking him in these things, if we're trusting the Holy Spirit, and we're solid together, we have good, healthy boundaries for our family, and we're investing in that first and foremost, everything else is going to be all right. So,
yeah, it's interesting to me, when Dan was sharing just as we just got started, we talked from the very beginning when I first 5 years ago said, I feel like I can lead another 5 to 7 years effectively. And so let's start this process. One of the first things that we did was that I talked to both Jake and Chris and said, hey, are you guys interested in being lead pastor at Northpointe? This is not any kind of guarantee, anything. This is just asking to see kind of where you are. And not just being lead pastor at Northpointe, but being lead pastor in that time frame. Because at that point, Jake had been here for 3 years. Mm-hmm. He had said he'd be here for 4 years.
Yeah.
And so out of my experience, I had this clear sense.
That's how you get a youth pastor to stick around longer, right there.
Well,
did you hit your limit?
Yeah.
All right, here's the carrot.
Yeah. Sometimes, no. I mean, sometimes it really is no. I'm ready to take that next step.
Yeah.
And I want to do that in the next 2 or 3 years. 5 years minimum is too far away. There are a lot of different stories that we could tell just in terms of God walking us through the process over the last 5 years. Part of what my perspective has been during that time was I wanted to invest in you
Right.
and to give you opportunities so that when you became a lead pastor, you wouldn't be just jumping in the deep end.
Right.
You'd have some sense of that. And so if that was going to happen at Northpointe, that was a win. If it happened someplace else in the kingdom, that was a win too.
Which,
so
like, let me just stop you there for a second, because that's a very unique mindset, even in churches. Like, you and I both know from being around people, sometimes the calling that God has put on our life, you know, there can be pastors that have blinders on that, and it's like, no, this is my thing, my calling that God has given me. But the ability to be kingdom-minded wide enough that says, hey, if I invest in this guy, I might actually train him up, that he's going to be really good somewhere else. Yeah. Not a lot of places like to do that, even in churches, because we're so driven on the thing that God has given us that it's hard to see the kingdom mindset at times. And I'm not trying to bash any other pastors or anything like that, right? We know how difficult it can be. But just that mindset that says, no, hey, what's good for the kingdom is what matters most.
Right.
Like, that's just a very different mindset, I think, at times. And so the ability to be humble enough to say, hey, it's not about me, it's not even about Northpointe completely, but I want to invest in this guy. Like, that's a huge thing. And I think that's an important thing for us to realize as a church, that that's something we've gotten for the past decade from you. Like, that there's a kingdom mindset that goes on all across the world. You know, we just had our missionaries to Sri Lanka here and their story and how that connection comes and stuff like that. Like, your ability to be attuned with the Holy Spirit and have a kingdom mindset has permeated throughout our culture as a church. And I think that's a really special, unique thing, of part of what makes Northpointe Northpointe. So I just want to stop and say that, so you can keep on going now. There you go.
Give me some money. I'll give you some money, whatever. God's good. You know, the bottom line is the story that He writes is a great story.
Right.
And there are so many just different pieces that you discover along the way. We talk about, it's been a long time ago that I used the phrase God working upstream. You know, that God does stuff at some point in time in our life that it may be months or years later that it's like, oh, that's why that happened, or that's how all the pieces fit, and that's a really cool thing. So you've been here 8 years, you're in your ninth year.
Yeah.
Biggest lessons that you've learned, or not biggest, some lessons that you've learned.
I think the biggest number one thing is the importance of people. You know, we just kind of hit on it a little bit there, talking about the investment in others, but you know, I heard this early on, but I've bought into it probably more than ever. I talked earlier about my youth pastor growing up, and he couldn't connect with every single kid, but he had a team of people that could. That Bill Woolley was the one who made the connection in my life. It wasn't Scotty Neal, our youth pastor at that time. And that's just that idea of you have a greater impact when you are allowing other people, you're making room for other people to be a part of stuff. And even taking that step beyond, that God has put inside every single person skills and talents and passions and abilities and gifts and all of those kinds of things. And that, man, we are better off when we're utilizing those as much as possible in the church. You know, when we think about our model, even for teaching team, once again, not a lot of churches do some of the teaching team stuff that we do, but we recognize and value the idea that God has placed that particular gifting on more than just you, more than just me, more than just like so many people. And we've had a lot of people come through that have been able to utilize it. And we're always open to grow in that as well, which is a really cool thing. So I just think that idea of utilizing people, there's a famous football coach. You may have heard of him before, Woodrow Hayes. Yeah, he has Woody. Yeah, he has a famous saying that I used to have on a wristband here that just said, "You win with people." You win with people. That it wasn't always about scheme. It wasn't always about having the best facilities. It wasn't always about the best weight room or those kinds of stuff. But it was the people that you brought in and the people that you were a part of. And that was kind of the big thing that he preached. And man, I don't know what book of the Bible he was reading, but that lesson was just really hit for me when I was reading him talking about that. And so I think that's a big thing to be able to learn. Yeah. I think another big component for me is learning to be a really good failure. Because failure is inevitable, and I have had my share both in creatively trying stuff and
Did
leading.
You say share fair?
Share fair, yeah. There you go. Share fair. Yeah, in speaking.
my ears are saying, is that what I heard?
Yeah, there you go. So back to being a failure there, Rick. But it's that ability, I think, it's beyond even just learning from mistakes, but embracing those abilities, knowing that it's going to come, having the thick enough skin to be able to take it, and then surrounding yourself with people that are going to help you see your blind spots on that. You know, there's been plenty of times that I've had failures, or I've had things that have come back that have been hard pills to swallow. And what I've learned is to go to people that I can trust, that are honest with me, and to be able to say, okay, what am I missing here? What's on me here? I can't control all the other outside things that are a piece of that. It's good to know, right? Like not everything is always on you. There's other factors that come into play, but really focusing on what are the things that is on me that I can grow and I can learn from, and then not being afraid to take a risk because you're going to fail.
Right.
Because if you expect failure, which sounds funny to say, like you're going to still be able to embrace risk. So embracing failure and embracing risk, I think, are some big things that I have learned under your tutelage here at Northpointe, Rick.
Well,
how to be a failure. So there you go.
Yeah. Thank you, I think. How old are you?
35. Yeah. 36 in December, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's like 55 in kid years right now is what it
That's
feels
right,
like.
yeah. One of the things that I've said is, you know, I will, a month from today, I'll be 65, which is crazy. And you're 35. As lead pastor, you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But anybody who would come in from the outside would make mistakes too.
Sure.
And I continue to make my fair share of mistakes. You know, that is God working in that. That's the big thing. That's just a good thing. You talked about teaching team. Let me just ask a softball lob. Is teaching team, is that concept going to keep going, or are you going to preach like 48 times a year?
No. Nobody wants that, including myself or my wife. So there you go. But no, a teaching team it's like you said, it's, as we talked about, it's in the DNA of allowing people to utilize their gifts and abilities. And we've got people in our church that can teach and that know the scripture and can communicate well, and that God has put things on their heart. I mean, we need to utilize that. We need different voices. We need different experiences and perspectives. As long as we're within our guardrails of unity believers and authority of scripture, I mean, there's a lot of room for that. And we're blessed. I think we've had some fantastic people on our team.
Yeah.
You know, our core team right now is you, me, Larry, and Andy. But we've allowed other people to come in and speak. We just had Laminda here before. We've had Chris, who was on the team before. Yeah. Mark's been on the team before, all the way back to Buzz. I remember when Buzz
Bar.
Was, yeah. So, like, we've had variety in there and a lot of different kinds of people. And I think that's just helpful. I think that's good.
Yeah. Quick fun story. I had coffee yesterday morning. Well, no, I didn't have coffee. I had tea,
Diet Coke,
Diet Coke, whatever. With an area pastor that's been coming to church some, and I think that he has been here 4 or 5 times and has not heard me preach yet.
Oh, yeah, that's about right.
Which is it was kind of like, do you ever preach? I do. Sometimes.
We've had some friends that have come 2 weeks in a row, and it was like, oh, they've heard me, they've heard a missionary, and they haven't heard Rick.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah. Which is that it's a cool thing because one of the things I'm grateful in that for us as a church is that there isn't any sense of, oh, Rick's preaching, I'm out the door, or Larry's preaching, that's not. There really is a sense that God speaks through the whole team in a way that that really blesses, encourages, teaches the body.
Well, I'm thankful too personally because like my time here in down in Cincinnati at the church plant, like the opportunity to hone that skill. Yeah. Because Latin, sometimes guys who don't have a lot of speaking experience still come up in front of the church and be able to teach and be able to do that stuff and make mistakes and kind of get the feelings and the jitters or whatever out. Like this is a cool place to be able to learn and do. I've always said for people that when we've done interviews, when we've talked to a place, Northpointe is a great place to come and learn because you're allowed to have little fires. And our job as staff is to keep the big fires from burning everything down. But you can make little mistakes. You can make issues. You can have stuff there, and you can learn from it. And speaking is definitely one of those. I've been there.
So before you came to Northpointe, you came out of State Farm. You were Jake from State Farm. Yeah. What was that transition like going from working in the marketplace? Most everybody who's here works in the marketplace. Yeah. Coming onto church staff full time. What was that transition like?
Well, I worked out of a big white van before, so that was a big change coming here. But it was different from like a lot of things because when I was doing that, I was doing State Farm full time, and then wearing a bunch of different hats at a church plant at night. So when I said I wanted to be Batman, that was not what I had in mind for the like night day job change at all. But I loved working with State Farm, and the best part of that was helping people. It was still a cool thing as a claims adjuster, walking into somebody whose house had been on fire and being able to tell them it's going to be okay and being able to provide them a little money or get them in a hotel or do all those things. Like that service part to be able to help people through their struggle was a really, really cool thing. You also learn to communicate with people who were experiencing trauma. who had lost loved ones, who had been through those different things, and then you're one of the first faces showing up and seeing those kinds of things. So the ability, I think, even to do ministry at State Farm was an incredible thing.
State Farm was your vehicle for ministry.
Yeah, it really was. You
Yeah.
know, I talked a few weeks ago about my buddy being trapped in the van with me for 40 hours a week and talking about those things. But it was more than just that. It was the ability to, like I said, show up at people's houses when they were having terrible days or going through traumatic experiences. And just knowing behind the scenes, like it was more than just, all right, let me get my job done here kind of thing. And so I enjoyed that piece of it. And then working at the church plant, man, there were so many hats to be able to do, because if anything needed to be done at that time, it was me and one other guy. He was doing full-time and I was doing part-time. And so going back and forth trying to get stuff done was exhausting, and it was also invigorating at the same time, because you could try anything and it just didn't matter. Failure was embraced at that point, and so that was great to be a part of. But then being able to come up here, what was so different was I came here with the opportunity to learn so much. You know, I had the opportunity to do whatever I wanted to do down there, and that was great, and I enjoyed pieces of that, but I also recognized I was going to hit a ceiling at some point in time, and I needed to surround myself with people who had better ministry experience than I did, that I could glean from and have the opportunities, and I could have a different bar to where failure of any kind wasn't okay, because we're just trying stuff. We had a level of excellence to be able to get to.
Yeah.
And so that was a cool thing to kind of embrace and be able to see a part of. Logistically, working in an office was really hard for me year one. In fact, I remember, I think it was Chris, we were in a meeting at some point in time, and he just brought up and he said, so Jake's in and out of the office a lot all the time. That's just okay right now? And you said yes. And I was like, oh, man, I had no idea, because I was so used to not just sitting in an office in whatever I did. So it was common for me to go work at other places or be there, and I needed that mental refresh, and I still do at times today. But that was like logistically just an interesting component, and watching even our culture here shift a little bit more on that.
Yeah.
So,
What things are you most passionate about in ministry? What are the things that light your fire that you care about the most?
yeah, I love seeing people take next steps. Like that's the big thing. We're all in different places in our journey towards Jesus. You know, that's the whole mission, right? Helping all people move towards a life fully devoted to Jesus. And that movement can be small steps. It can be in different places than maybe where I am or where you are, or somebody else. But I think the thing that is so invigorating to me is to watch somebody who everybody else would have seen as far from God, and to just watch the Holy Spirit come in and just take over and to be a part of that. And it's anything that we're obedient, right? Like all of us are trying to be obedient in conversations that we have or those moments, but it's really relying on the Holy Spirit, just like it always is. And when we're obedient, the Holy Spirit does his thing. And to be able to see that happen, man, I love watching communities change because people decided we're going to share the gospel. I'm going to be intentional with these things. Church isn't just going to be a piece of the pie, but it's going to be the whole pie, and everyone's going to get a taste, you know? And so the ability to watch that occur in people's lives, and then hear the stories of other people who are just so amazed that their neighbors showed up and what it meant and what it did, like that right there's the good stuff. You know, that's what just reinvigorates and lights something inside of you.
It is a really, really cool thing to have somebody come and say, this person who has been a part of my life months or years ago has come to church. I never would have expected that. And then just seeing the Holy Spirit work.
Yeah, it's incredible. That's
cool.
That's probably the biggest thing.
What are some things that you love in particular about Northpointe? You've talked about a lot of things, but
the biggest thing, it's home, and that's an incredibly unique and interesting thing to say, because when we came, we were going to be here for 4 years. I was going to learn, and we were going to move on to the next thing, probably move back to Cincinnati. Like that was the desire, because we had so much family. My wife's an only child. My mother-in-law would follow if grandkids came, and she'd bring my father-in-law with her. We knew that. So we were kind of banking and trusting on that.
Corner down there.
Yeah. But there was, and I've told this story a little bit before to a few people, but I remember sitting in church as a youth pastor still in that time period, and sitting next to Ashley, and there was nothing extraordinary about that Sunday. Like everything was what we do. You know, Jamie was leading worship. It was fantastic. The preaching was good. People are there. Everything that's there. Like it was just a normal Sunday.
Was I preaching that Sunday?
Nothing was extraordinary. It was just a normal Sunday. And I remember just sitting there. I'm sitting next to Ashley, and I just stopped singing for a second, and I just kind of listened to everybody. And I love to do this. I love to just kind of listen to all God's people singing together in unison. And so I was doing that. And as I'm looking around at different faces, most of them I had known at that point in time, some faces I didn't know. And it just kind of morphed inside of me, this recognition that, man, this wasn't just our church anymore. This wasn't a job anymore. This was our home. So as we're having conversations to figure out after about 3 years, what's our next step, and Ashley and I are talking, we didn't want to leave. We didn't want to go anywhere, and we didn't expect that. We stayed because we wanted to be at Northpointe, and we didn't know what that would look like. We hadn't even had a conversation about anything at this point in time.
Yeah.
Didn't know what other opportunities would come, didn't know what it would mean. We just knew this is where we wanted to be. We wanted to be at Northpointe. We wanted to be at Lansing, Mid-Michigan, all of this kind of stuff, which for a guy growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio as a Buckeye fan really is a incredible thing.
An act of God, a work of God, yeah.
Like I jokingly told my buddy in high school, his name was Tori, and we always said, like, man, we would never live in Michigan, and we would never marry a Wolverine, and in God's humor, I married a Spartan, and he joked, he's like, so you just like stepped on the other side. That's so weird, right? And it was great.
It's a really fun thing to just see how God works and see parallels. Because, I remember 10 years ago, I've told my story a whole bunch of times. Didn't ever plan on being a lead pastor. I was interviewing other places, and I talked to the guy who was doing the search for Northpointe, and he said, "Okay, what about this? What about an unconventional lead pastor position in Michigan?" So we began to talk about what was going on at Northpointe at that point in time. If you've been around, heard, things were tough at that point. But have this great conversation. We're in Ohio, at our house in Ohio, talking on my cell phone in the driveway because we didn't have good cell service inside the house. Talk to the guy. I go in and say to Deb, "What do you think about a lead pastor position in Michigan, close to Lansing?" And she said, "Yeah, okay." And it was like, it really was just something completely unexpected. Yeah. And it's cool the way that God works in our heart and works to, again, upstream to prepare us for those moments. What do you think some of our biggest challenges are as a church?
Yeah, I think Northpointe is incredibly unique, and it's 184 years old.
Yep.
And so that's an incredible legacy. And as you dive into the history of it truly being a community church, how it even got to removing denominational titles and all this kinds of stuff way before that was a thing. That's an incredible thing to be a part of. But I do think there's a bit of a piece when you are around for 184 years, it's very easy to just become a thing that's in the background as well.
Yeah, coast.
Yeah, you can coast. People don't recognize that you're there, all that stuff, because you've always been there. I told a story a little bit ago about my siblings making fun of me going back to Cincinnati because I would go to these new restaurants that had always been there, but I never paid attention to them, right? And I think it can be easy as a church to be that. And so I think one of our big challenges is how do we grab the community's attention? We have the greatest message out there for people, life-changing stuff to be a part of. How are we creative? How are we engaged? How are we driven enough to be able to get everybody that says, hey, come be a part of this? And it's both at equal parts. Hey, we're going to take something to the community, but also getting people on property. We're always kind of chuckle when we know that people, as soon as they pull in the driveway and they get in the parking lot, they're amazed at what it looks like back here because it looks so different
There's
from the road.
a big building.
Yeah, everyone's blown away by that. And so that opportunity, I think, to get people on property and develop those relationships, I truly think, man, if they would step on Northpointe's property 3, 4, 5 times, they're going to check us out on a Sunday. So creating those opportunities for people to be here and be seen that. So kind of getting Northpointe out of the background of people's minds and get more to the forefront with stuff. That I think is a pretty big challenge.
I think there are actually even some people who are here this morning for the podcast, for the Q&A, that have never been in this room.
Right. Yeah. I hope so. We have security protocols in place, so I do hope that is a thing.
That's right. It's hard to know, obviously, and we're talking about still year away a little bit more than that. What are some things that you expect might change when I transition out and you step in?
Yeah. Oh man. It's like you said, it's incredibly hard to know. It's easier to say the things that I feel like won't change in a lot of ways. Because what makes Northpointe is not going to change. You know, the guardrails are still going to be the guardrails. Our desire for relationship and the belief that you go further, faster with community and with people and all of those kinds of things. You know, we're here because that's hardwired into who we are, and we bought in and believe all of those kinds of stuff. And so I think that's part of why the fit works. I think that's why a lot of those pieces come into play. You know, we're not going to change the name or move the location or anything. We're not trying to do any of those things. We're exactly where God wants us to be and who God wants us to be. And it's just more about spreading that and making it bigger. I imagine things will change. It's really hard for me to say what, because number one, I'm not like coming into a position saying, oh, this is absolutely what needs to change or those kinds of things that are broken. And part of that's because, man, we've worked so close hand in hand now for years on this kinds of stuff. So some of the things that are broken at Northpointe, man, I helped break at this point in time. You know, they are the way they are because of the team and the pastoral team and the eldership and all the things that we've kind of put into this. And I've had the blessing enough to be a part of some of those things. And so I don't foresee huge things there. I think there'll be things that are naturally happen because of personalities. You know, we talked about Northpointe is who they are based off of your personality and your passions and desires and how that's permeated over the years. So I imagine some of that will happen. Eventually, that means that, you know, we'll probably get some scarlet and gray on the walls or something like that. Probably.
Nice.
Janet will
We're
never,
not going anywhere.
Yeah, Janet will never let that happen. She has removed those from all the paint things everywhere. No red, no gray. But I don't, you know, so it's hard for me to say because I don't imagine there's going to be some major cultural shift. I think there might be hopefully a vision that we put into where it will be kind of buttoned up against that time. But that's not going to be just me to be a part of that either. That's a team that we have. And I think that's an important cultural thing is that we are team driven at Northpointe.
Yeah, let me talk about that just for a second. So 5 years ago, well, if you've been around Northpointe for a long time, you remember that probably 8-ish years ago, somewhere in there, I think it was maybe before you came, that we adopted the vision to reach 50,000 people in 5 years.
I know, 15.5, I was a part of that one.
You were part of, that was the first vision that we created. So accomplished that in about 3.5 years where we felt like that vision was done. In January of 20, we came up with the vision, had a team work together for that where we said, we want Northpointe to be a place where everybody who calls Northpointe home would see God working in their life and be talking about God, talking about how he's working in their lives, in their sphere of influence. That we landed there, Own See Share, in January of 20, just energized by that. And then a couple of months later, that kind of got something came up in there somewhere with COVID that slowed that process down. But we've been talking about that now for more than 4 years. 5 years ago, when I first talked to the elders and said, here's the time frame that I'm thinking about, 5 to 7 years. And as the elders, we said, the elder said, that's really, really great because then we can hire a new lead pastor. He can help craft the vision for where we go. And I said, yeah, that could happen. Or we could hire the lead pastor having already established the vision and make sure that we're not all of a sudden going a different direction, that we're on the same path. And collectively, we all kind of said, oh, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. And part of, from my perspective, that has helped me have a sense that you're a part of God's plan for Northpointe has been the vision. You are the vision. The stuff that you just talked about. We talk vision all the time, and so while we may see some nuances differently, the guardrails of the importance of Scripture and the importance of people, no matter where they come from, pursuing Jesus together, unity of believers. That's part of who you are. That's part of who we are as a church. We want to make a difference in the community. We want God to transform people's lives. That's part of who you are. And so whatever the next vision is, and that we'll work on that in January of 25. That's going to be birth. It's not going to be anything new and radically different.
Yeah.
How have you been preparing for stepping into this new role when the time comes?
Yeah.
Personally, professionally, spiritually.
All that. Yeah. Leaning on other people. That's been the big thing. You know, I've been sending out emails to pastors all over the country, even of just saying, hey, can I come pick your brain? Most of them I get back and say, who are you? Which is great. But just relationships that I have with people who have gone through there. People in our church, man, we're blessed to actually have a lot of people in our church that maybe not be on staff, but have decades of ministry experience. And I love buying them coffee and hearing stories and picking their brain and talking with them.
Yeah.
And so it's really just trying to glean from other people's wisdom and being a part of it, working on different leadership components and stuff like that. I love anything that's like leadership material to be able to be a part of, or that is.
Is this a commercial for Global Leadership Summit?
Yeah, sponsored by GLS. Insert code here. Yeah, and so I think that's a big component that for me has been life-giving. There are actually, I think, more resources out there now to do ministry than even when I got here. To be able to do stuff. And so it's really figuring out, okay, what can I grab from here? What can I do there? And then just being a sponge to everything and recognizing, okay, there's going to be points in time where I can come back to this resource, hopefully, to be able to do, or back to this person, and then just trying to glean wisdom from other people and learning from both their successes and mistakes as well, to not repeat something that I can learn from somebody else, but also to expand my thinking by having conversations with people who have done things drastically different than I ever would or would imagine, and figuring out, okay, why is that, and what were the results, and what were the situations and circumstances, and how would that apply to us as well? Because not everything is a perfect fit. All because it worked over there doesn't mean it's going to work here. So how do we make the principle that was over there become the principle that's over here as well?
Yeah. You're 30 years younger than I am. When I step out of the lead pastor role, all of a sudden our staff gets way younger.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Way younger. Any thoughts on how to approach that reality?
Yeah. I think the reality is we're going to need to hire somebody in here just to be able to take over groups and some of the other things that are there. My desire, and it's all going to be dependent on what God wants, right? Like I can have all the desires in the world. He's got somebody, right? He's already got this person ready to go, and we're going to be obedient to whoever that may be. My thought process is that it would be somebody with some ministry seasons on them, some experience and stuff like that. They can bring hopefully some new perspectives, because we have a lot of Northpointe culture in here already. And so that idea of somebody who maybe just sees things a little bit different. We've been blessed to have Jenna on our team here for a while. Jenna has different experiences than we do. Andy came on as an interim youth guy, and so we kind of rooted him up in Northpointe way, if you will. That's not how Jenna did. She had different experiences at a couple of different churches that she had been a part of, and kind of is bringing some of those there, and has done a fantastic job with that. So I think that's a big component of it. We're also blessed as a church to have really good people in our congregation that are fantastic leaders and can bring so much. Specifically in my mind, I think of men's and women's ministry. Getting to meet with Craig and John and Bob with our men's stuff, and they are at different phases of life and different experiences and different personalities, but God is working through them to reach men, and I'm excited to watch this thing grow and what it's able to do. And I also recognize too with our women's ministry team, those three ladies are doing a fantastic job that they're pouring into, but they've surrounded themselves with other women that are pouring into them, and part of some of those women are women who have been through more life experiences that can pour into. And so I think that is a beautiful thing about our church. We're on that opportunity, is to be able to say there are people in our church with life experience that love Jesus, are passionate about Jesus, that can pour into the next younger generation in an incredible way. And so I know I have to find people that are going to be able to do that for me and do that resources there. But this is why stuff like I've already had conversations with like Larry Carter, and Larry, if you want to stick around, I want you around, man, because you're a very different voice than I am and experience than I am. And we need that as a church, teaching the word and those kinds of things. So being able to find that balance that's there. And then in the meantime, with youth, figuring out ways to get experience, resources, the educational components, and all of those kinds of stuff. So it's things like pushing into conferences or pushing people to get new experiences or new ways to be able to look at stuff, to get seasoned quicker if we can, and find out what that looks like. So,
and I do think that while we will be lots younger, you've been here for 8 years.
Yeah.
So it's not like somebody coming in that's young. I think at some level you recognize many of the landmines that you could step on.
Yeah, for sure.
where somebody else might not, which is a cool thing. Okay, I've got some lightning round questions.
Oh, good stuff. I wanted to look at these ahead of time. I got those in here.
Are you going to move in the house on the church property? Are you and Ashley going to move into the annex?
No. We have a home, and I have been in the basement of that annex, and I am not going down there again, man. It's literally been years since I've been down there, and God bless Joe and Janet for going over there from time to time, because I am not doing that.
It could be nice around Halloween.
That's definitely not a time to try.
Do you anticipate that we'll change the missionaries that we support?
No. I love all of our missionaries and getting to know them and being a part of it. And we talked about this before. It's so unique, the fact that we're spread out all over the world, and they all have very different things going on. Just if we were talking Jake Chandler in his new position, going from Western Michigan to
Michigan Tech.
Michigan Tech. I was going to say, I couldn't remember if it was Northern or Michigan Tech. And taking on more responsibility. Like, man, that's not a time you withdraw. That's a time you invest more and you pour into that, right? Because it's just a great opportunity to be able to have the Chantaires and them interpreting the Bible. They're not done interpreting that Bible yet, right? Into that language. So, we got to make sure that gets done. Like, there's some important things that are going on with our missionaries that I am very excited as a church to be a part of. The Kenya trip that's coming up. School's not fully built, right? Like, there's still a lot to be able to do and be a part of there. So I'm excited for what it means for us as a church and these opportunities. So
I kind of touched on this, but let me just say it because it's a great question. Will we do away with the teaching team? And you preach all the time. Will Larry continue to be a part of the teaching team? Are there others who might join the teaching team?
Yeah, no, we are not doing away with the teaching team. I will not preach all the time because that's exhausting as well. Larry's going to continue to be a part of the team. We've already had those conversations with Larry, and I've asked him, like, man, please continue to be this if this is what you want. So if not, it's Larry's fault if Larry's not a part of the team. Are there others who might join the teaching team? Man, I hope so. And I hope so over the years. I hope so, all of that, because God's got people out there who have messages and that he's put on their hearts and have skills and abilities and stuff like that. We're on the lookout for that all the time, which is a really unique thing, a really cool thing. And sometimes it's allowed us to bring other people on, like a Larry, and that we can say, hey, great, this is what God wanted. Other people tell us no, and it's great. That's not the right timing or whatever too. So hopefully I think you'll see some transition, some change there. Nothing immediate necessarily on the horizon that we haven't already been planning on in conversations here. But no, I'm hoping it just continues to grow as well. So
cool. When I first began to talk about retirement, what'd you think? Can't wait.
No, when you said I got a few years left to retire, my thought process was, where am I going to work? Number one, like I got to have job security on those kinds of things. I don't know. I can't even remember what we thought because it feels like such a long time since we've had these conversations.
Well, we've been talking a lot for 5 years.
What was the first thing that I probably thought that was there? I don't know if lead pastor was really fully in my mind at that point in time. It was probably just more along the idea of what does that mean for Northpointe? What does that mean for my family? What does that look like for us? Is there going to be space? And then also when it was like, hey, so many years down the road, I think my second thought was probably, oh, cool, I'm not worried about it anymore. At that point in time, we're good for a while. But it was just more probably curiosity. What is God going to do in this? I don't think there was even the thought of, I don't think lead pastor was on my mind when it first came up. And if it was, I think one of my first thoughts was probably, hey, I wonder if Chris wants to do that. Because Chris had been here for so long and been a part of Northpointe culture and all that. And Chris's response, which would have been a response to any church, not just the Northpointe thing, was absolutely not, because that's his wiring. And good on Chris for recognizing that about himself too. I think that's a cool thing. So,
what will the transition for me look like? Will there be some kind of, this is a weirard question
to ask. This is a weird question.
Will there be a celebration of my ministry at Northpointe? Will I ever come back to speak?
Yeah. I can answer, we're going to definitely celebrate. Like that's a big piece of it. It's so cool.
That's so weird to ask.
Yeah. We're going to celebrate big time. And then when the staff's done celebrating, we'll do something as a church. I'm just kidding.
Love it.
It was right there, man. It was right there.
Too easy.
Yeah. No, I know being around the elders and stuff like that, we want to have conversations about what that looks like and stuff like that. And I think they've purposefully kicked you out of a few of those because, man, it is truly worth celebrating you and all the things that are here because it could have been very easy for Northpointe to not be 184 years old today. with some of the stuff that's happened, and people that have been here to know what that feels like. And those wounds were deep. And when you walked in the doors, those were really painful moments for a lot of people. And I've been around a lot of churches and a lot of places that don't survive that. And so I think, number one, it's God's Spirit continuing to do stuff. It's all the people that were around at that time that wanted to be obedient to God. It's God bringing you and your personality to be able to bring healing and comfort and love. And then on top of that, like, we want to celebrate all that's happened in this past decade. But on top of that, too, how many years of ministry experience, Rick?
A lot. 40 something.
Yeah.
45.
Like that's worth celebrating, to being a part of. I know so many pastors, and it's so heartbreaking. Good friends, people that I sat under that are not in ministry anymore for terrible reasons, for heartbreaking reasons, from things like burnout, from things like sin issues, from all of that. And to be able to have a pastor who gets to the end here and gets to the end well, and doesn't leave destruction in his path, but is able to actually even hand a baton off well. Guys, this is a rare thing. Like, I think it's important we recognize that. This is a rare, rare thing. And this is the Spirit moving and the church, it's the eldership, but it starts with the fact that Rick had enough love for us as a church years ahead of time to stop and say, hey, here's what I'm going to do. And to be a part of that and trust that God is working in that, knowing that there's still things you want to do in ministry, right? Ministry is life, as you've always said. Yep. And so whatever's next will be ministry related in some form, whether that means you're working from State Farm and that becomes your ministry or whatever, even, you know what I mean?
Rick from State Farm doesn't have the same ring.
How do you feel about really tall roofs? There you go.
Yeah. Not very good.
Yeah.
Not very good.
So all of that is worth celebrating. And it's worth celebrating you. It's worth celebrating what God is doing. It's worth celebrating all the years at Northpointe and beyond that he's been able to work and do stuff. So there should be a celebration. There will be a good celebration.
Let's talk. Let's just kind of bring everybody into the conversations we've had, because as we've talked, really just in the last month, and said, okay, we've got to start the process to think in terms of what the next staff person is, what their role is, what that looks like, and Jake has said to me, Rick, what do you want to do? Because we would like for you to stay. The elders would like for me to stay. What's that look like? And I've said I feel pretty confident that in the transition I need to be gone for some period of time, so that there is a sense from the church to say, yeah, Jake's the guy. And it's not like, oh, if Jake says no, I'll go ask Rick. That kind of thing. I don't want that at all. And yet we've said we love Northpointe. Northpointe's our home. We don't plan on selling our house. We don't plan on moving, anything like that. And so we've had conversations to say, well, is there a place for me?
Yeah.
Like Jake has said to me, whatever you want to do, we want to have you here and be a part of staff. And I've said, that's great, but ultimately the right question is, what do we need as a church? And then the question is, can Rick, does that fit what I want to do, what Deb and I want to do? Is God in that or not? And so we're having those conversations. And
we haven't landed on anything necessarily. Just part of that is because we still have time.
Right.
You know what I mean? And recognizing the things that can change. And we've had those conversations to be able to see. But, I think we've had the talk if it's in some capacity, don't want to say, hey, retire and then come work full time again. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And Deb will be very upset if we do that.
Yeah.
But, part of it is, even if it's not winding up a staff position or something like that, like you said, Northpointe's your home. We want you to be around here. And just like anybody else, we want you to use your God-given gifts and abilities and talents and stuff. What does that look like? So I don't think we know what that fully looks like yet, but we're open to conversations and figuring that out.
Because I have a chance to just share with you guys, but also anybody who watches the podcast, kind of where we are early on in the process. When we began to talk about retirement, one of the books that we read said it's critical to know what you're going to do afterwards, because pastors are oftentimes They help solve problems. They are at the center of everything that happens. And when they retire, if they don't have something to do, they create problems that they can solve.
Yeah.
And so they blow. It's really easy to blow stuff up. I don't want to do that. But when we started to talk about what that looks like, one of the things that I began to talk about was doing interim ministry at churches that have experienced stuff like Northpointe did, churches that have blown up, that are struggling, that can't really effectively hire a new pastor yet because they're just a mess. I think that God has uniquely gifted us, allowed us to have experience to be able to do that. And so it's very possible that we may end up doing that, and it would be the kind of thing that we move for a year or 15 months to Minot, South Dakota, or is that North Dakota? One of those Dakotas.
There's more than one Dakota. When did that happen?
Yeah. So we may do that, but at the same time, there is a sense as we've talked that I may be able to bring some stuff that could meet needs for Northpointe without me working full time.
Right.
I deeply love our missionaries. And it has been a really cool thing to be able to go to Sri Lanka, to go to Ecuador to see the church that we helped plant, to go to Kenya. I love it. So maybe there's a place in that. I think that there's a fairly decent chance that, particularly if we're local, I would continue to preach. Sometimes that kind of thing. So nothing's definite in any way. We really are. One of the coolest things about this process has been, from the time that I first talked about the elders, I made a conscious decision to not hide the conversation. So we talked about it early on with the staff, not in any kind of specifics, but to just say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. And so we've had, I talked about it with my life group. We've had conversations ongoing, and this is not to pat me on the back, but I think it's the right thing to do. That has just been a normal part of what's happened over the last 5 years, and that's not normal in most churches. And for that, I'm really grateful to Northpointe. That's a cool thing.
Yeah, it's fun. We've had good ways of referring to it. Rick's going to go to a farm up north, all sorts of stuff. All the jokes that we've been able to make a part of it over the years now.
Yep. Last question I have: why do you have to be from Ohio? Couldn't we find anyone from Michigan?
The Lord works in mysterious ways. Anyway. Yeah, there are lots of great pastors here in Michigan, and sorry, guys.
We can't help where we're from.
Can't.
Hey, you know what? I don't know that I've ever said this in a public forum at Northpointe, but let me just tell y'all, I was born in Saginaw, Michigan. I was born in... Jeff Kimmy just said that explains a lot. So there was health in this diseased body. Yeah. Oh well. Hey, we thank you for watching the podcast. If you've stuck through to the end, thanks so much. Thank you guys who are here for coming. This doesn't obviously end the conversation, and so we're going to be around. Feel free to talk to any of the elders, talk to me, talk to Jake with specific questions. We didn't get a lot of questions for this, which is okay, because we just wrote our own questions.
Yeah, there you go.
And hopefully this has been a great thing for you guys to be a part of. So thanks. We appreciate you very much.